Okay. All right. Welcome everybody to the fall Bachelor of Computing internship panel. We're so excited to have everybody here. Before we get to the questions, I'm just going to take a moment and introduce all of our panelists. So with us, we have Patrick Kopp, Julia Hohenadel. I might have said your last name wrong. I'm so sorry. Alex Montague, Giovanna Cusick, Isaac Wismer, William Doi, I'm sorry, Christina Kadir, and Josh Samuels. So I'm going to ask each participant to just introduce themselves. If I butchered your name, please say your name correctly and I will get it right through the rest of this meeting. And we'll start with Patrick. So if you can just say a few words about yourself, that'd be great.
I'm a fourth year computer science student. I'm in co-op, but I'm not on a co-op term right now. So my next co-op term is next semester. And yeah, I just got my job. So just filled out all the paperwork. So looking forward to next semester.
Congrats. Next, I'll have Julia introduce yourself.
Hi, I'm Julia. I'm a fourth year software engineering student. I've worked 3 co-op terms, 2 as a software developer at Magnet, and just recently as a cloud developer intern at CloudOps. My next co-op term starts in January at Tulip Retail, where I'll be an information security engineering intern, and I'm looking forward to tonight.
Wonderful, thank you. Next, Alex, if you could just say a few words about yourself.
Hey everybody, I'm Alex. I'm a 5th year software engineering student here, and during my undergrad, I've worked at 4 different companies throughout my internships, and they've ranged from startups to established companies, and I'm happy to be here. Thanks.
Wonderful, thank you. And Giovanna, I understand that you're joining us from New Zealand today.
Yep, I'm across the ocean. My name is Giovanna. I'm in my 5th year of my software engineering degree. Throughout my co-ops, I've done mostly financial institutions, but most recently I did a business one thanks to my minor. And yeah, and now I'm abroad. So great to see you guys.
And Isaac, if you could just introduce yourself.
Hey everyone, I'm Isaac. I'm a 5th year computer science with a minor in GIS and environmental analysis. I've just finished my final co-op with my degree. So I've worked a few different places. I worked for the government for one. I worked at a small company in Vancouver, and I worked for a medium-sized company in Bern, Switzerland for my last job. So yeah, it's good to be here.
And Will, you're joining us post-graduation, I believe. Can you just say a few words about yourself?
Yeah, hey guys, hope you guys are doing well. I go by Will. I'm actually an alumni from the University of Guelph, and I have no relation to SOCIS at all. I'm actually from the School of Engineering, Engineering Systems and Computing graduate, but I kind of pivoted from typical engineering jobs to software engineering, and I have experience all the way from production support to now as a software engineer. So hopefully you guys can learn from my experiences and pave a better path forwards for yourself. I always hope that I had these chances back in when I was in school, but we had very little of those in engineering. So hopefully this is very useful for you guys in the future.
Thank you so much for joining us. Next, we have Christina.
So my name is Christina Khada. You got the last name close enough. I'm currently 3rd year computer science, and I'm on my 2nd work term. I did both of them actually with the University of Guelph, but with 2 different professors. And I'm minoring in media and film studies. And yeah, happy to be here.
Thank you. And our final panelist is Josh. Can you just introduce yourself?
Sorry, hi, I'm Josh. I'm a 5th year software engineering student at the University of Guelph. I've done 4 co-ops at 3 different companies, and I've actually had 4 different roles, ranging from iOS, backend, DevOps, and full stack.
Thank you everybody for joining us tonight. So we're gonna start just about talking about what it's been like to work in 2020. 2020 has been a wild year of ups and downs and new experiences for literally everybody, every panelist here. And it can at times be really easy to forget we're in the midst of a global pandemic, and the way that we work has changed drastically. So for some of our panelists, that actually has been completely inescapable. As I mentioned before, Giovanna is still in New Zealand after her most recent co-op experience, where she worked at an advertising agency in Auckland. And Isaac spent 8 months abroad in Bern, Switzerland over the summer and winter before returning home. I just want to ask, Giovanna, what has it been like working abroad during a pandemic? I understand that New Zealand contained its outbreaks fairly well. Did your offices go remote? Did you ever consider coming home?
I know this probably sounds horrible to everyone, but I actually forget sometimes that COVID's going on here. When it first started, I think in May here, we did go remote for only 2 months. And I did go a little stir crazy over those 2 months, but after 2 months, we like slowly started adding people back into the office. So they did like every other day, they'd have 50% of the people in the office. You'd have to sign in just in case. And then slowly it just completely went back to normal, which was nice. I did consider going home. I had everything ready to go. My lease was signed and everything. And then my sister was kind of like, why would you go home if life's normal here? You know, you don't really have to like stick to a schedule or a plan. And I was like, you know what, you're right. I'll just stay here. So very happy with my decision though.
Cool, that's great. And Isaac, you had a kind of similar experience in Switzerland, but Europe did not as well with containing its outbreaks. And watching that map was pretty scary at times from Canada. So what was it like to experience the pandemic from Switzerland, and how did it change your co-op term abroad?
I'm gonna say the biggest thing was I didn't get to do a lot of European travel that I was hoping to do, which meant that I was just staying in Switzerland the whole time. But Switzerland, despite the numbers, they didn't really lock down at all. They did lock down. They locked down, but you were still allowed to leave. There was never like a you must stay at home. They just closed businesses and that sort of thing. But I worked from home for about 12 weeks, which is something that takes some getting used to. But the company I was with was very flexible, and they're super good about making sure everyone had what they needed to work from home. And otherwise, as long as you wore masks on public transit, you could still take the train. So I was still most weekends going into the mountains to go hiking and climbing and that sort of thing, and just working through the week. So despite the high numbers of cases where I was, like in Bern, they were never that high. It was mostly Zurich and Geneva that were really bad. So I thought about, I didn't really think about coming home. I consulted with my family and that sort of thing. And I decided, well, here there's going to be COVID, at home there's going to be COVID. So at least here I have a full-time job and I'm getting paid and I'm in the mountains. So it doesn't really make sense for me to come home. I might as well just finish the work term and then see what it's like in September. And I ended up coming home about a week early so I could accommodate quarantine before school. But otherwise, yeah, everything was pretty normal for me.
And to the rest of the panelists, can you describe what your transition was like from an office-bound environment to fully remote work? I understand that everybody here had to work remotely during the pandemic. How was that experience?
I worked in Montreal for a company based in Montreal over the summer, and at the beginning of my work term, they mailed me a laptop and 2 dozen bagels, and that's how I started my term. So it was basically just Zoom all the time. The first couple of weeks, it was like 6 hours of Zoom every day just to set up the dev environment and to get started. And there was still lots of Zoom, but yeah, that's just sort of how working from home came to be for me.
And Will, you have something to say?
Yeah, I think probably everyone here has been through this process where you have to go through onboarding, especially since going on to new jobs means you got to learn a lot of stuff. So when you're onboarding compared to office environment versus remote environment, there are a lot of simple and stupid questions that you usually ask in office that makes it very easy for you to learn. But those simple and stupid questions make it very hard for you to type out, especially if you're messaging a senior developer. So it's a lot harder to onboard as compared to being in an office environment, but it allows you to take your own time and approach things at your own speed because there's no rush of someone looking over your shoulder. And then one more thing I wanted to address in terms of COVID, since we're on the topic, is that it is hard to find jobs right now. So if you're in a position where you're not getting jobs as often as you used to be, you're not getting interviews as often as you used to be, you gotta keep going. It's tough right now. Prior to obtaining my job right now, I think I applied to like 300 applications for new grad, and I had offers rescinded because of COVID-19. So if that's happening to you right now, you just gotta keep fighting. It'll get better soon.
Yeah, I actually had an offer rescinded as well. I was like 3 weeks after I got a job for last summer, really early into the new year, so like end of January, and I had my offer rescinded in like late March because of the pandemic, which really sucked. So yeah, I totally agree. Like jobs are harder to find because of it. And especially now that stimulus is gone, like I know that where I was working over the summer, my wages were being paid for a lot by the government and by like other, like institutions. I don't know what they're called, but all those science helping will pay your kids' wages, whatever. So I think that it could be more of a struggle. So, but don't be disheartened. Like, yeah, I applied to 120 jobs for my first co-op term. So just keep at it, I guess.
I'll just add in one thing that I noticed changed a lot working remote is that it's really hard to ask those silly, stupid questions. Normally when I just roll my chair over to my coworker's desk and be like, hey, this isn't compiling, what am I doing wrong? And you'd be like, oh, you're missing this right there. It's really hard to do that in remote work. And so you end up spending a lot more time dealing with small bugs that you would just be able to fix in 30 seconds by asking somebody else. And so you got to learn to just reach out to people really quickly and get things fixed, or just learn to use debugging tools and look at error messages really well so that you don't have to reach out as much.
Thanks, everyone. So Will, I understand that you actually also worked remotely before the pandemic. How have you found that is it different now than it was before, or is it the same? Did you have any struggles? Will, you're muted.
Yeah, thanks for catching that. Yeah, so usually when you're working remote, let's say you have a job and it's usually in office, and then you have the chance to go remote for some specified period of time. Usually how it works is you have a task assigned to you, and at that time you should be pretty used to what your task is doing. So the questions that you have for your teammates or your team members are much more focused and you know what you're asking. But in this circumstance where you join a full-time as remote as what I did, it's a lot harder to ask those focused questions because you really don't know what you're doing. So it's a lot harder, but being able to work full-time remote is kind of a good thing because you can set your schedule yourself. Of course, you have those meetings that you're required to go to, but you're able to work later if you want to, work earlier if you want to. And in my case, I actually start at 10 a.m., 10:30 a.m., and I work until like 7 p.m. Just because I like doing what I do. But my team is actually in Vancouver, so their 10 a.m. is my 1 p.m. So the reason why I actually work until 7 p.m. late is because I want to be with my team, and I have a lot of questions that can't be answered unless they're up and working. So compared to prior to the pandemic, there's a lot of communication issues because everyone's still getting used to how they should be talking to each other full time. Being able to keep your teammates at a personable level is hard to juggle as well, because not only are you not seeing them, but it's a lot harder to interpret what a message means through text rather than face to face. So sometimes you get a problem where you feel like you're being dismissed because your teammate is busy, and you ask them a question and they say, I'll get back to you, but they don't get back to you for 3 or 4 hours because they're busy. That same situation in real life, in office, could be just as simple as tapping them on the shoulder and saying, hey, how do I get this set up? And then they would just tell you it'd take 30 seconds. So it's a little bit more difficult. So you gotta be able to stonewall yourself with those feelings, because sometimes they really are just busy and they're not out to sabotage you actively.
It makes a lot of sense. It's very insightful, understanding that, you know, you are working on a team, and people don't necessarily know what it's like to work remotely, and that can cause a lot of issues. Christina, you have actually only worked remotely because you're in 3rd year. You've just gone through your first 2 co-op terms, or actually you're in the midst of your 2nd co-op term, I believe. What's your experience been like?
Honestly, it's very, very interesting. I was looking forward to the whole like getting dressed up, taking public transport, going to your job, and like hanging out with coworkers and all that. So it is kind of unfortunate that I did miss out on that. But at the same time, working remotely is not half bad. You do get to make your own times, which I think is very relaxing. You don't stress out as much when you're kind of like your own boss, at least in the 2 jobs that I had. But like Will said, it is also kind of important that you do maintain a schedule, whether that's working in the morning or the evening. But I found it, like, I'm personally way more productive if I set like 7 hours a day for myself to do work. And you kind of, like, you set goals for yourself, you monitor yourself instead of like having a boss or whatever, like over your shoulder, and just getting the job done and then like continuing on with whatever you want to do in your day. And also getting to do all that in PJs, not going to complain about it. So it has its, like, yeah, like I don't get the office experience, but it's still definitely relaxing, especially like the whole COVID thing. I'm not complaining about just getting to stay home and do my thing.
Totally. Okay, so Christina, you spent your past 2 terms working at the university. Will, you have experience at companies big and small. We have some folks on this team who worked at startups, who've worked at big companies. Will's had experience at FAANG. Every company of a different size, of a different structure, has a different culture. And I think that a lot of first years are wondering, what is it like to work in these different companies, whether it's remote or not, because we have experience with all of that here. So let's start with startups. Josh, you just recently got off of a term at Taplytics. Can you let us know what it was like to work at a startup?
Yeah, so I'd actually worked at only large companies before that and had learned a bunch of diverse skills. And so going into that co-op, I was like, I want to work at a startup where I can kind of do a bit of everything and learn a lot in a lot of different areas. And so I went to Taplytics, and honestly, it was all that and more. I was treated basically the same as a full-time. I just had like conversations on pull requests and everything as if I was a full-time. And I basically touched all the code that they had, from their SDKs, backend, front end, and Angular and React, DevOps, and then internal and external documents. I like did it all. The last thing I guess I'll mention is their size, because startups can obviously vary in size a lot. Taplytics was around 25 people, and their culture was amazing. Like, it was kind of hard to tell online, so that co-op was all remote, but like they tried to make the best of it. We had a handful of events, a lot of like meeting the engineering team and other teams and all that.
And Will, you also have experience at some startups. How does your experience compare to what Josh just said?
Yeah, I think Josh did a really good job in explaining what you should be expecting when you join a startup. So when you join a startup, as an intern or as a co-op student, what they're really expecting you is to do something a full-time person would be doing, because they really require that extra hands-on effort. So if you work for a big company, you might notice that you're working on internship projects, and how you get graded on is basically how good your internship project is during that work term. But when you join a startup, as Josh said, you're kind of reaching your hands all over the place. You want to be able, you're able to touch everything because they require those people. There's no specific schedule as to what's going out next. So they have people working on the clock, doing as much as they can because, you know, the product has to go. It's in a very critical state. I worked on more of the end stage startups. And even then, it was still hectic because I was hired as a software engineer, but I ended up being full stack because they needed someone for the back end, they needed someone for the front end. And you just got to be able to pick up those skills and really get into it. And it's really a really good environment to learn, especially if you have very supporting coworkers.
That's great to hear. And so with startups being so usually like lean teams, lots of like kind of extra responsibilities, I wonder, how does that contrast to government? We have Isaac here, who spent a term at the Canadian Geologic Survey. What was your experience there like? Is it at all comparable to what you might experience at a startup, or is it like polar opposite?
I think it's different, definitely. One thing I'll say for government is it's very different from private industry in terms of what you are going to be getting in terms of like your development environment. I found when I was working for the government, the equipment I got tended to not be as good as the stuff that I got when I was working for a private company. It was much harder to, I wanted a mouse pad, and it took like 4 weeks to get it because it has to go through like an acquisitions and that sort of thing. Whereas I just worked at for a private company, and you could get something in 2 days. You didn't need approval or anything. So the one downside of government is, yeah, it's things are slow. And there can be a lot of office politics involved because everything's publicly funded. And so, you know, there's always people trying to get more grant money or get, they're always trying to figure out how to get the projects on the budget. That being said, I did work for the Geological Survey of Canada, which is a scientific government organization. So I think that the experience is a little bit different than if you were working for some other organizations, say like if you were working for, I know, what's the security agency called? Not SOCIS, the other one. They hire a lot of co-ops out of Guelph.
CSE.
The CSE, yeah.
CSE. And I think that it might be a little different. But overall, like, I still thought that what I was, like the work that I was doing still felt meaningful. Like it wasn't, I know some people in big companies and government often feel that they were just doing a useless project that no one was ever going to see. But at least from my perspective, I felt that what I was doing was actually meaningful, and it was, you know, creating something useful, which is always something really nice. And the government tends to be, you get shorter days and that sort of thing. You're not working as much, but it's also less flexible. So I was only working 7.5-hour days, but I didn't have vacation time. My schedule wasn't as flexible compared to when I was working 8.5-hour days at a private company, but I had vacation time to use. And I could just say, I'm not going to come into work tomorrow because I want to do this. That wasn't really possible at government. So I had a positive experience. It was great, but it was just, yeah, very different, a little more rigid, and
so Patrick and I had a kind of an interjection at the same time, and I think that was because Patrick interviewed for the Canadian Communications Security Establishment, the CSE. So I was just wondering if we could get, we just heard a lot of kind of like maybe downsides and restrictions about working in government. I was wondering if we could also hear some of the reasons why, Patrick, you wanted to interview, why you wanted to work for the government, and then also Isaac, if you could elaborate on the same. So we'll start with Patrick.
Yeah, so I spent a lot of last January, no, sorry, not January. It started around like November. So when I was in my second co-op term interviewing for the CSE. So like for those of you who are watching who don't really know what it is, it's the Canadian NSA. equivalent. So they have Enclave, which kind of corresponds to British, whatever the British NSA is, and the American and a few other agencies. And yeah, I actually have a funny story. So I was interviewing for them, and I had gotten all the way through to the final round, and then they just needed to pass security clearances. And so you go in, and it's like the scariest moments of your life. Like they pull you into this room, it's just you and some agent, and the agent's like, you know, like an absolutely massive guy, and he's asking you these questions, and they're most like descriptive questions like you can ever imagine, like every little facet of your life, everyone in your life, what you've done with who you've done, like where you've been, everything, like everything. And it gets a little personal.
They ask you to describe all of your family members and all of your friends, and then if you've been in any relationships in the last 6 months, you have to describe their family members. The
specifics of those relationships. Yeah. So
you have to give them links to all of your social media accounts. You have to interview with a psychologist. You have to do a lie detector test. It's hardcore.
So anyway, so I failed, apparently, the security clearance. So and I was told by a member of not family, but my girlfriend's family, who's somewhat high up in the RCMP, that a good chance of why I got turned down was I wasn't born in Canada. So
I also
not to
know
say that anyone
interviewed for them and was turned down probably because their family is from a country that has more hostile relations with Canada, and they were turned down.
Yeah.
So
not to dissuade anyone from applying, but keep that in mind if you're not born in Canada, that, you know, it could be a negative. But I mean, obviously try. I wouldn't dissuade anyone from trying. And why I wanted to work for it, I don't know. I just thought it would be cool to say like, oh, I have top security clearance, NSA.
And let me just say that that interview procedure is only for those high security organizations like the CSE and SOCIS and that sort of thing. When I was applying for the government, I applied for CSE and stuff and did all that. But when I was applying for the Geological Survey, you don't have to do any of that. You just do regular interviews and you get hired like a normal company. So it's not that scary for most government jobs, but the CSE is pretty cool. I know that we have a couple grads who now work there and are enjoying it. And Ottawa, if you're working there, is a beautiful place to be. So,
yeah.
Thank you so much for sharing your experience with government, Isaac and Patrick. I'm sure that a lot of students are considering applying. Maybe they will consider not applying after hearing some of this, but that government is a completely different animal from private industry, and so this is really to be expected.
Oh, can I just interject?
Joining us.
Just one more thing. The government pay is standardized. It's decent. Like that's one of the upsides of government is its pay is okay, but it's all standardized, so everyone at a certain level gets a certain amount for students. And also, if you've worked for the government as a student, it makes it super easy to get in full time later on in your life. So that's a plus.
Okay, right on. So with things in mind like pay and public relations and processes for getting hired, private and public companies in industry operate very differently from government. And on our panel today is Alex, who has interned at Shopify, which is one of the largest tech companies in Canada with over 5,000 employees. And Josh is here joining us from Square. I just wanted to kind of get a sense of what is it like to work at a really big company. Not quite FAANG level, but just like a sizable company in private industry. So we're going to start with Alex. Can you just tell us a bit about what your role at Shopify was, how you got there, and then where you're going to be after you graduate?
Yeah, for sure. So I was kind of in the opposite of someone like Josh. Like I had only interned and only worked at startups. And for my last internship, I really wanted to get that like big company, not FAANG level, but like good, solid, big, scalable company experience. And I'd always loved Shopify. I knew they were doing really cool things. It's always been like one of the best sort of internship experiences that I've heard. So I really wanted to sort of experience that. And so I interviewed, got the internship as a basically a web developer. They called me basically just a full stack developer, where their stack is obviously they're like a Rails shop, so they do a lot of Rails stuff. Ruby on the front end, back end, and then our new stuff is like React in TypeScript, which is really cool. So I mean, it was everything I expected. Like, to some things people were talking about earlier, it was an entirely remote internship. I started or just finished this August. So I onboarded, did my entire internship fully remotely. It was great. They ship you everything you really need to operate, and anything else you need, they'll get you that as well. And it was really a great experience. I had no complaints. I learned a lot, and I really got the coming from a startup background where you are doing everything. You're a front end developer, a QA, you're a back end developer. It was nice sort of having a specialized area and a specialized team that you could really focus on and make sure that what you're working on was the best thing possible for the company. So instead of maybe running around doing everything and you're like, well, maybe I got to compromise on some things here, it was nice to sort of dial down and do one thing that your team focused on really well. And so that was awesome. And after the internship, I liked it a lot. And they're really good with this too, just talking with your managers. And I'm happy to say that I'll be returning there full time in 2021. So they are more than happy to take interns on board full time as well. And I'm super happy with the experience.
That's great. Congrats on your job offer, Alex.
Thank you.
Next to Alex on my screen is Giovanna, and Giovanna also has experience at large companies. She's worked at somewhere that was more than 5,000 people. Unfortunately, I don't actually know where it was that she worked. So I was wondering if you can tell me, where is it that you worked? And then also, what is it that you did, and how was your experience? Is it like what Alex described?
Yeah, so I've worked for a lot of banks and insurance companies. So I guess I can talk to you about Scotiabank because I did that one twice. I think with large companies, it's pretty cool because you get to be a part of different things. They offer you a lot of, so I went back twice. And the first time that I was there was completely different project, completely different building. And it feels like you're doing something new and brand new, and you're not in the same place because large companies just have so many different avenues and things that they're doing. I personally really enjoyed it. You learn a lot. You get to work with a lot of people. You get to make a lot of good connections there. The only thing I would say with large companies is that maybe sometimes you don't really feel like you're making a big impact because they're so large. And you're like, I'm working on this very small part of this software system. Am I really making that big of an impact? But I think if you find the right team, like I know my first time with them, I was super motivated. They really made you feel like you were like doing them a solid, like really helping out. So I think finding the right team and finding the right company is both very important. But yeah, so if you have one bad experience, it doesn't mean it's a bad company. It's just maybe not the right team for you. So yeah.
That's a really good point that you just made there, that, you know, within a large company, between teams, you might operate like completely differently, and finding that right fit is really important. Josh had a kind of similar experience to you, where he had 2 back-to-back work terms with Square, with one within a completely different organization from the other. He was working for Square, and then he was working for a subsidiary called Cash App, which has a completely different culture. Are you able to just elaborate on your experiences there, and does what Giovanna just said resonate with you?
Yeah, so it definitely like resonates. And it's funny because my project at Square, I spent a couple months working on it. It was basically an intern project that I was doing to help the company, or I guess, yeah, to help Square migrate to Kubernetes, even though Cash App was already on Kubernetes. And I think it was a month or 2 after I left, they actually stopped working on the project just because priority shifted, people moved to other orgs within the company, and like they didn't have anyone that knew Go to do it. So they kind of like dropped it, and I kind of had that feeling, which was a little frustrating for a minute. But at the end of the day, it's an internship. You're there to learn things, not necessarily, and not always to like ship code and to write code that's used by a lot of people, although that is a fun side effect. And now to kind of contrast them, Cash App kind of operated like a startup, not like a large company, but they had the infrastructure of Square. So a lot of like the big benefits and security teams and like communication and all that was still there. But in my day-to-day, it only felt like I was working with the people that were actually on my team. So not even all the iOS developers, but like it literally felt like the lending team that I was on was like the whole company almost, or like a whole feature. I didn't have to like talk to as many different people as I did at Square.
Cool. So you've kind of just highlighted a really like important and weird point, which is that you know, within larger organizations, you might have smaller organizations, you might have like teams and departments which feel themselves like much smaller organizations. We spent a lot of time talking about big organizations, so I want to kind of pivot this discussion and talk about something that's a little bit smaller. Julia, you've worked for, I'm going to say smaller and mid-sized companies that are based out of KW, and most recently you worked remotely for a company based in Montreal. How do your experiences with these more modest sized companies compare to what we've just heard?
I think that my experience with the smaller companies is more similar to that of a startup. They're like, the teams are very close knit, and like the voice of a lowly co-op has so much more reach than I think it might have in a large company. But sort of the energy is more like a large company because it's like less stressful than startups. They're like, you know, they're more stable financially, and they have like, I think, more patience, and like, this is gonna sound bad, but just like less expectations for a co-op, right? Like you're not expected to work like a full-time dev. Like I think they're a little bit more forgiving. To me, like a startup is kind of like a yellow flag because there's a high risk of it being like a boys club. And I always try to look for companies that have at least like one non-male coworker on the dev team. So like smallish companies are my favorite for that reason, and just because I think the cultures are really rich. Also, like both at Magnet and at CloudOps, you can like, you just have like, they gave me like special roles. Like Magnet, I was like a Christmas party committee member, and like CloudOps, I was like the TikTok creative director, and I really like just how like much I could like get involved with the company, and I just don't think you can have the same reach at like a larger company.
That's super cool to hear. It's always really neat when co-op students get to take on those like cool and interesting roles, like the creative director of a TikTok account for your company. I didn't even know that companies generally had TikTok accounts. So yeah, that's pretty cool. In terms of like functions within organizations of entirely different styles, we also have Christina here, who spent her terms at Guelph, and she's on a co-op term at Guelph, the university, where she's been working on some projects for some professors. What's it been like for you to be working just directly for a professor within the Department of Computer Science? I understand that relationship is very different from that of like a manager and a mentor to a mentee within a traditional private company. So I was hoping you could elaborate.
Sure. To be honest, it was a little bit intimidating at first getting an interview and like having a professor that you've already had as your boss. My first co-op was with Professor Judy. I had her class, didn't do so well, so I was very terrified. Like I knew I had to impress her at all times. But it's very funny just how chill everyone is. Working with Judy, I worked with other professors, and then now I'm also working with Professor Stacy. They are the nicest, kindest, most understanding people, and I feel like it's both part of them, like they're teachers, right? So they have that at heart, and they're also your teachers, so they really care about you. They always make sure that I'm getting the experience that I want to get. They're making sure that I'm learning from whatever I'm doing, and they're not hard on you. Like if you have a rough day or if you miss whatever, they're very understanding and they help you out. So generally, like I got they earn a lot of my respect working with them. Beyond that, it's also very fun. like at certain points, especially when you're done a certain project, you will be on an email chain that just keeps going up the ladder. And that's so interesting to see. Like it goes from just the professor to the head of the school, to the head of the college, to suddenly it's at the dean's office. And you're like, I don't know how this happened, but I'm glad to be a part of it. So it's really fun. And you, especially working with the SOCIS, which is obviously what we're part of, like you learn how the school works from the inside, how they, like with Stacy, we're part of the outreach committee. So I'm learning how they managed to get me to come to Guelph without even noticing it when I was applying. It's very interesting, like the ads, the social media, and just getting to see, like, I'm seeing inside information on how I got pulled into this, and it's so entertaining.
I'm gonna poke you a little bit later in this discussion to get some more info on how that recruitment is done.
Sure.
But you mentioned just now that you're in like what I would imagine is like a development / research role, but then you pivoted to doing some outreach and social media and stuff. Julia, you also had like the same kind of experience, not maybe to the same degree, but working as the creative director for a company, TikTok. Do our students like tend to expect these kinds of things from their co-ops? Is this something that they can actively reach out and try to do if they're interested in exploring something that's not quite what was in their job description?
To be honest, I was not positive that that's what it meant in the job description, because it was there. It was like handling outreach, social media, whatever. But I thought it was going to be more like business side. Then I'm straight up posting on the U of G computing, which is, I didn't even know students handle that. So it's kind of like, I guess, like you said, students should expect that that is a job that they can apply to, or it would be part of their job. But like, just be aware that students do it. It's not some random liaison officer handling the Instagram account or whatever it is.
Yeah, I personally just made friends with all the people in like HR and the office directors and like all those nice ladies, and they just like give you opportunities. They're like, hey, you like Christmas? Do you want to like help with the Christmas party? And I'm like, yes. And hey, you've made a TikTok before. Do you want to like be the TikTok person? I'm like, yeah. So it's just like a matter of just like reaching out and not staying in your little dev corner. But if you want to do other things, go look for them.
That's amazing. So we've just spent a fair bit of time talking about what it is that people did in their roles. At the beginning of the panel, I think it was Will mentioned that you had to apply to something like 300 jobs before you landed your position. And Patrick, you applied to something like 150 jobs. Is this something that students should expect, that they have to send out hundreds of applications? How many jobs do you have to apply to before you can actually land an internship, especially your first one? I just want to pose this question to the whole panel and see if I get some idea of what your experiences were like landing your first internships. How many jobs did you have to apply to? What did you apply to? What was the process like?
Yeah, good question. I think what's really important here is applying to, well, if it's your first co-op and you don't really have much experience, it'll be harder for you to be more specific on what you're applying to. So it'd be best to broaden, what you're applying to. But once you get a couple co-op positions down, what you should still be doing is applying to a lot of jobs. And what this does for you is it allows you to go through a lot of interviews. And then if you are doing well in those interviews, you can get a lot of offers. So if you apply to a lot of applications at once, and these interviews start scheduling up, concurrently, maybe you get a phone call today and you get a phone call tomorrow. And if you follow this line of action, what you start to see is that near the end of your application process, all of these jobs and offers are converging into one point. When you get your first offer, what you can do is reach out to your second and third interviews and say, hey, I have an offer right now. You better move quick or else I'm gone. And at that point, you start speeding up your other process where you're interviewing, and now you end up with possibly several offers on a table. And at that point, Although the co-op office tells you not to, you should try negotiating for a higher wage, because now you're valued. You have experience in your pocket, and now you're also wanted by other companies. So I recommend, if you're starting off, to broaden your horizon, apply to things that are not specifically dev related. But once you start getting experience down your belt, start shotgunning resumes and get as much applications out there, because once you do go down this pipeline, you can get a lot more offers in a tight time frame, which lets you leverage a higher salary and better brand recognition.
Yeah, I
just,
agree with that.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Josh.
I just want to jump in to say one quick thing, since this is mostly directed to students at the University of Guelph. If you're in the co-op program, you can only decline one job, I think it is, or maybe two, unless you have multiple offers lined up. If you decline your second job, then you get kicked out of the co-op program. So that's a better strategy off of Guelph's portal.
You don't get kicked out of the co-op program.
Yeah, you just get off of the jobs list for that semester.
Oh, really?
Yes.
Okay.
So what happens is you don't have access to Experience Guelph anymore.
Okay, so that's for that.
Yeah, exactly. So it's
very
bad.
Important for a lot of
people.
It's
important.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah. I think it's, sorry. I just think it's important to mention that if you do apply to multiple jobs on Experience Guelph and you do decline them, you're not out of the program. You are still free to apply externally. In fact, you don't have to apply to all of your co-op jobs through Recruit Guelph, or I think it's called Experience Guelph now. External applications are super important, and they're also a really good way to get around the one decline rule. So I'll let Patrick say his piece now.
Yeah. So to go off of what Will said about strategically handling your offers. So after I got my offer declined last fall, or last spring, I guess. Yeah, last spring. I had 2 offers right after, so I started applying again, and I got 2 offers. One for working at the school under Professor Chattervidi, who most of you probably took SIS 1500 with. And also a job at Mantech. And so Mantech actually, I immediately told both of them, I'm like, hey, I'm kind of considering here. And Mantech actually asked me, they're like, how much is the professor going to pay you? And I was like, okay, you guys are clearly just going to up it by $1 or something. So I was like, clearly you guys want me, but I wasn't really happy with what the professor had offered me for the summer anyways. So I actually didn't tell them how much the professor was going to pay me, and they highballed me, so I got more than I was looking for anyways. But yeah, so I think it's just important to be strategic, because at the end of the day, the companies are looking to improve themselves. You have to look out for yourself. The company isn't going to, if the company could pay everyone $1,000 a year, they would. So you guys have to really look out for yourselves, and just be smart about how you're applying to jobs, and make sure that you try to have as much power in the applications as possible.
So when folks are applying to these jobs, and before they can even get to the the stage where they're considering an offer, where they might be negotiating numbers, whether or not they're encouraged to do so, a lot of students are struggling to know what experience should they be highlighting on their resume if they've never worked a tech job before. Is it relevant to list experience working at a McDonald's or Tim Hortons or whatever other previous non-tech jobs that they've worked? Should they list that on their resume? Just get the opinion of the panel here.
I'll try and pitch in on this.
You can go.
Oh, sorry. I think especially if you are at your first or second work term, or if it's your first now due to COVID or whatever, I don't think it's a bad idea at all to put random job experiences or even volunteer experiences that you have, because it still shows that you're diligent, that you're an active person who wants to get a job and you did good at those jobs. Also, I noticed the way that I tried to fix that, I worked at Tim Hortons and Sobeys, that was my only job experience before that. And the way that I tried to combat that is I added my GitHub to my resume. It's not even that good, but honestly, again, and I was talking to Laura about that, it shows that you care. You cared enough to make the profile, put whatever projects you had on there. And I think not all, like you can even put university projects on there, maybe not all of them. I think we had to check like with our professors, but just honestly showing that you are trying your best to look like a good option for them to hire is good enough. You don't really need like, wow, I have the C program memorized. That's not really useful.
I know that when I was talking to people who were hiring, they said that they mentioned like basically any position of responsibility you've been in, even if it's not paid, like if you've done volunteering, that is a position of responsibility where you're working with other people and you have something that you need to do. Like if you're a volunteer leader for something or anything like that, those can be important, even though they're not paid. People can look at that and go, oh, look, they can, deal with people. They can do that sort of, they can make sure things get done. So even non-paid experience is really helpful to have on there, I think. And I'll reiterate having a GitHub on there. And if you have any projects that even if they're school projects, saying, look, I did something cool, I'm interested in it, and I have it well documented. That's a good thing to have.
Can I just add something to that too? Like, I think
we'll take one more answer to this and then we'll move on.
Awesome. Like, I think, especially if you don't have a lot of like job relevant tech experience in the tech industry or anything like that, like 100% put your GitHub on there. Side projects, like you said, like put that down there. And also I recommend trying to do something that'll maybe make you stand out, right? When you're trying to get that interview. So that whether that be like a project sort of tailored towards that company or something that I did, you guys are more than welcome to do something like this too. Like I created a route on my website. So it was like my website /Shopify. And I sent it to them as a part of the application, like saying why I want to work for you guys, right? Like a little blurb, who I am, some projects that were relevant. And I actually got feedback. They're saying like, wow, this is really cool. It's like, no one's really put this much effort into showing like why you want to work for us. And that really helps, especially if you don't have the list of jobs beforehand that show that you know what you're doing, like projects, something different to stand out and just, be different, right? Show that you care. And I think a lot of companies really respect that, and you'll hear back for sure.
That's awesome. Now, so I'm going to kind of speed things up a little bit here because there's a lot of important sections of this panel that I want to get through before we take our break. So there's a lot of stress that goes into the process of interviewing, of preparing your resume. Students wonder like if their grades matter. They wonder if their experience is relevant, and then they wonder if they like completely like failed their technical interview, if they're going to pass their HR screening, and then eventually, once they do get that job and they do get that placement, sometimes that anxiety doesn't actually go away. And I just wanted to like ask the panel if anyone has any tips or experience for like that they want to share for students who might be feeling those kinds of anxieties, that they might be feeling symptoms of what's known as imposter syndrome in their jobs. How does one handle that? How does one increase and secure their self-confidence when you have that role, when you've secured that role that you were hired for?
Okay, this is like one of my favorite questions because I actually did an entire presentation on how to fight imposter syndrome in May. So like, first of all, we should like all acknowledge like imposter syndrome's a real problem. And it's very common. Not a lot of people speak about it. And it's a problem that's kind of like similar to a lot of different like mental health problems. So in my belief, like you have to fight it in a similar way because it's like you are convincing yourself you're an imposter. And also like it's not talked about. So like I really think to combat imposter syndrome and these anxieties, you just have to celebrate your accomplishments when they happen. And like they can be little celebrations, like having a little treat, like treating yourself to a Starbucks, texting your mom like, hey, I did this thing, like texting your friend, like doing something fun, but safe, #COVID, and like to give yourself a break, to lift yourself up, and just to like let your success like also lift you up. And like, remember, as a co-op, like you aren't just hired for your current abilities, but for what your employer perceives as your ability to grow. So yeah.
That's a really important point to make. I think a lot of students go into jobs and they think that, you know, they have to fulfill every aspect of their job description and more, as if, you know, because you're working with full-time developers alongside you, and you feel like you have to match that ability. But yeah, you know, companies are hiring co-ops really to invest in your talent, and that's a really important thing to internalize. Will has his hand up as well, so I'm gonna take him.
Yeah, I think Julia did a good job describing, you know, tips on helping yourself come out of imposter syndrome. But what I wanted to highlight is, I personally think imposter syndrome is a good thing, which maybe you guys don't think, because it makes you a lot more anxious, yes. But having imposter syndrome shows that you think or believe that you are not doing as well as you should be, or you're kind of bottom of the barrel compared to your teammates, or maybe people in your cohort. And I think that's a really good thing to have, because that competitive aspect of saying, hey, I'm not doing so good now, I should be working harder, I should be learning this, I should be doing that. I think it's a very good thing, because it allows you to put more effort into it and learn a lot more things than you would have normally learned if you were thinking instead, wow, I'm so good at this, I'm the best at this. So I think it's actually healthy to have a little bit of imposter syndrome, but it looks like Julia does not agree with me.
So before I take Julia, I just wanted to ask, Will, you mentioned that, okay, having this idea of a bit of an impostery feeling is a good thing, but do you have any concrete tips for students to you know, actually make sure that they are tracking that progress, that they do feel that they're improving when they feel that they are improving? Because
Yes.
a lot of the time, you might just constantly have that feeling that that you're not living up to the task. But there are little actions that you can do to keep yourself on track and help erase or erode those feelings.
So there are big ways to do this, and there are also small ways. So Julia highlighted that, you know, once you finish something, you know, treat yourself, you know, celebrate that you did something correctly, and that way you can uplift your spirits, and that can be a positive reinforcement into kind of understanding what this imposter syndrome is. Now, to reflect on a bigger way you can do this, I'm going to go back to what Giovanna said earlier, where you're working at a big company and you feel like you're kind of just one other person in a sea of thousands of people. What you're missing there is a sense of ownership, a sense of responsibility, a sense of thinking, hey, I am doing something that matters. So what you have to look for in all of your internships and all of your jobs in general, in the future, now and in the past, is something to take ownership of. That way you can track your progress, and when you reach those milestones that you have set up with your supervisor or your manager, you are actively combating your imposter syndrome, because look, you are meeting these goals and you are doing something about your imposter syndrome. This imposter syndrome is actually helping you improve, because it makes you fight for it. It makes you want more of it, because now you're doing what you wanted to do and you're learning a lot faster, because you previously thought you weren't learning fast enough, or you weren't doing something up to standard. But if you were someone else who was thinking, hey, I'm so good at this, I'm the best at this, you know, I don't have to worry about this, then you can see how that can kind of be toxic and lead you towards a downward spiral where you're very content with what you're doing, but not necessarily improving.
Julia, do you have anything that you wanted to say in response to that?
I have a lot I want to say, but I want to keep it brief. I don't think that imposter syndrome and a God complex live in a binary. I think there's a happy, complacent, like there's a difference between imposter syndrome stress and regular stress and like a drive to learn. I think everyone, we're here because we like learning. And imposter syndrome, like you can't fix it by just driving yourself to the ground and like running, like working it out, because like you're running from your problem, you're not confronting it, you're not facing it. And also it's like a problem built with stress, and it's like so deeply correlated with stress, and it's also like it's the more successful you are, the more imposter syndrome you have. So running away from it and building up isn't going to solve your problem. You have to address it like greatly. Like we have to think about it as a mental health thing. Like Van Gogh is a beautiful painter. People say he was a great painter because he was depressed, but he was a great painter and he was depressed, and his depression is why he cut his life short, and it's why we don't have as many like Van Gogh paintings. Like imposter syndrome can make you sure, it could make you a great coder, but it could also like burn you out and cut your career short or something. So take care of yourself, take care of your mental health. Maybe like stress is never good. So just reduce it, and there's like have that same drive to improve, but I don't think it needs to be out of like, I think you can like be content with your abilities and still have a drive to improve.
That's a really great point to call out. I think that globally we're seeing like a faster and faster rates of burnout in IT. And I think that through like this semester, I've been feeling the burnout. I think that a lot of people have been feeling burnt out, and really taking that time for self-care and addressing problems at the root is super important. I'm going to move on from this topic, even though it's a really important one to talk about. Because there's still some more that I want to get through here. So in terms of like the state of the global tech industry, or at least the tech industry in North America, it's still a very largely dominated or male dominated field. The situation's improving, but I mean, as you can see on this panel, you can hear women are actually in the minority, and that is the case in STEM. And I just kind of want to hear what is it, Julia and Giovanna and Christina, what have your experiences been like as women working in STEM? How might they compare to what you perceive the experiences of your male counterparts are? Yeah, the floor is yours.
I would say usually I don't really notice most of the time, which I think is really good. Just in Canada in general, I've never really felt like I was a minority in any way whatsoever, especially even in Guelph at school. But I did have a situation at one of my internships where I had been the only female co-op that term, and we had come in and the manager was asking if someone was going to work with each of us. So he pointed to the first guy, was like, can we have someone shadow and help them out? A couple people raised their hands. He did the same for the second guy, and then he came to me and was like, oh, who wants to work with Giovanna? And no one raised their hand. And I was like, that's a little weird, because 10 of you had raised your hands for the two males, but no one raised their hand for me. So he put me with someone just out of random, and he refused to work with me. Every day he was like, sat me at the side and was like, oh, maybe we'll do some stuff tomorrow. I was like, okay, fine. Give me some documentation, something that I could read in the meantime. And he sent me beginner Java tutorials. And I was like, okay, now that's kind of too far. So I emailed my manager. I was like, I don't feel like I'm being productive. Can you please put me with someone else? And he put me with the one female on another team. So I think you might get into these types of situations, but honestly, I took that and I was like, I'm just going to prove to you guys how great I am. And I just kicked ass that semester. I like killed the assignment that they gave me. At the end of the term, everyone was like, you're one of the best co-ops we've had, like so proud of what you've done. Like, we want you to come back. All of them ended up like warming up to me and stuff. So I think if you look at it with the wrong eyes, I can see how it can put you down. But honestly, when he did those types of things, I was like, I'm just going to prove you wrong. So just look at it in the right way. Is just my yeah.
That is
my advice.
That's an insanely huge barrier to have to overcome. Just having someone completely refuse to work with you and then like refuse to acknowledge your experience. I can't imagine what that's like, and I think that takes a lot of courage for you to have turned that around.
I was just very taken aback because you just don't expect it, as like especially being around such great people in Guelph and my other internships. So it might just come out of the blue, but just look at it in the right way and just know and be confident in your own abilities. So.
And I just want to be clear, is this something that is experienced by a lot of women? Julia or Christina, do you have similar experiences of having to overcome barriers in the workplace?
I can't really speak about workplace specifically since both of my work terms have been remote. But I totally agree with everything she said in general, especially like in the classroom Guelph sense. You really don't feel that anymore. Like, you don't feel that you're at a disadvantage or anything. And especially, there's definitely still people who are butts about it. But most of the people that I interact with are so nice, and like they don't even think about it. Like they just see a friend, they see a colleague, they see like a student that goes to school with them. You don't see it in their eyes. But there's definitely still those people, those rare fews that are just gonna make you want to prove them wrong. I'm trying to use the nicest words here, but you just, it's the same thing that she said. You just gotta, you don't have to prove them wrong. I will state that, because really being confident in your own skills and knowing your own value is what's important, but it doesn't hurt to prove them wrong. Just stick it to them every now and then. But yeah, it's not that bad or like nowadays, but there's still those people.
And Christina, just while I still have you on the spotlight, you've been working with Dr. Stacey Scott in recruitment for the School of Computer Science. And earlier you mentioned that, you know, you had some involvement in the actual recruiting processes that go into reaching out to women in STEM. I was wondering if you'd be able to kind of just let us know a little bit about what made you choose computer science, and then what is it that SOCS does to encourage girls to join our program and then eventually make that step into industry?
Personally, for me, I've always been into computers. Like as long as I can remember, you can see like baby photos of me doing God knows what on a computer, probably playing video games. But so it's never been a question for me. Science in general has been interesting, and I have older sisters who went to engineering and med school. So like science is just built into my family. So it wasn't really a question for me, and I was not going to get discouraged by anything at that point. When it comes to outreach, our main thing is representation, which I wholeheartedly believe in. Even though you know you want to do something, it helps seeing someone like you doing it. It definitely helps. It at least makes you feel like, oh, there's someone I can connect with, at least on some level. And the way that we've been doing this is like we hosted Discover U of G and Fall Preview Day, which were both virtual like outreach things. They kind of replaced the Ontario University Fair, which I'm sure we've all heard of. And our main point there was making sure that we had at least one girl on the panel. And I think I actually saw some of the people that we had in the chat. We had one student for Discover U of G, and we made sure that it was a girl. And then the same thing for the other one. We had like 8 students or however much it was, and we hoped for like at least half of them to be girls. It was funny because it ended up being all girls except one guy. So that wasn't accurate to our ratios, but it's fine. We were even joking that like at that point, every girl in Comp Sci was working on that event, but it's fine. They don't need to know that. And same thing with social media, especially with GWIX. Like now that I'm taking care of the social media, I try and make sure that this doesn't sound very testosterone filled whenever I make like a post or like join this coding event or whatever. GWIX, I try to repost everything about GWIX because they're such an important club to know about and join. And yeah, just stuff like that, just showing girls that there's girls in this program, basically.
That's great to hear that kind of insight. I'm also wondering, and this is addressed to the whole panel, what are some ways that students, irrespective of their gender, what are some things that they can do to help advance the status of increased representation and to empower women and non-binary people in our industry? It's definitely a testosterone-filled one, but it doesn't have to be.
I think one of the important things is to be aware of your inner biases. And really, when you meet somebody for the first time in a tech environment, really evaluate what your first impression of them was, and think about if it was influenced by, you know, their gender or that sort of thing, and really be honest with yourself about making sure that you're not making an impression about somebody's skills or aptitude based on what they look like or that sort of thing, and instead you're evaluating them based on their actual work and that sort of thing. Because yeah, you can end up in really bad situations and with a lot of bias if you don't really check yourself.
I also want to say that I think being part of a majority group of any kind, like, it's kind of your responsibility to help make sure the minority group of any kind, whether it's women or color or anything, that they're like taken care of, and that in Giovanna's situation, no guy raising their hand. Like, honestly, if I was in that situation, I was there, I'd be the one person to raise my hand, kind of to like stand up for them and maybe like speak to HR or something. Like, it's kind of on the majority group, group to stand up and to like keep fighting to try to help everyone.
That's really great to hear. Is there anything else that anyone wanted to speak about on this topic before we move on?
Yeah, I'd like to talk about how the woman experience is not being asked what the woman experience was in the panel. Just joking, sorry, Keefer. Yeah, I wanted to talk about how Christina and Giovanna there's experiences where like people totally underestimate your abilities. I'm a teaching assistant for object-oriented programming this semester. I'm running like these competency exams where I have to make sure the students are like, they can code. And I've asked some people these questions to make sure they know the answer, and they respond in the most scathingly condescending way and try to explain it to me as if they're explaining it to a toddler because they think I don't know, but I'm their TA who's grading them. It's a wild time. Yeah.
Well, yeah, there's a lot of work that needs to be done by everybody to ensure that, you know, we have a respectful and equal world. I'm sorry that you have had to go through those experiences, and I realize that I'm speaking from a position where of privilege, where as a man I'm asking about the experiences of women, and I wish that it wasn't this way, but in the spirit of advancing the industry and making sure that everyone's voices are heard, I felt that this was a really important section of the panel to have. So we're going to move on to a completely different topic, one that's maybe more associated with bros on Reddit, which is an interesting contrast to the previous discussion we just had. So you might have heard the expression "Cali or bust." This is something that a lot of people think is like the be-all, end-all of our industry, and it's the way to make it in software development. Josh, you have had the pleasure to spend a term in San Francisco working at the Square office in 2019. Was the experience all that it was chalked up to be?
I would say that the whole Cali or bust thing is a little bit overrated. There's a lot of very intelligent people all over the world. They don't have to be located in California, although the perks of working in a Cali office because of all the competitors' offices being crazy is definitely there. And so like the Square office, for example, had a lot more perks than like their other offices and stuff like that, just to compete with the other companies in the area.
And during your time in SF, did you find that there was like a bigger bro culture, or was the culture similar to here? Is there work that needs to be done to address toxicity there?
I didn't really notice anything. I also only worked at Square in San Francisco and then Square in Kitchener. And so at the end of the day, it was all Square and all run and managed by the same people. And I know that they're like very good at like handling like issues in the workplace and stuff like that. And I personally haven't experienced anything, and I haven't noticed any of those like bros or whatnot. So it's kind of hard to address that.
All right, I'm gonna say that you heard it from the panel that Reddit is not the source of truth. Alex has his hand up.
I was just gonna say that exact same thing. I fell into the Cali or bust mentality for like one of my last and second last co-ops, and I was like, I gotta go to California. I gotta do it. I gotta do it. I gotta do it. And what ended up happening was I didn't get it. I had like some opportunities to do it. It never ended up working out. But in the like with COVID and everything, and looking back on it, like I think you don't need to think like that. There are plenty of amazing other opportunities, like in our country, one, and like even elsewhere. Like you don't have to go to one spot just to think that this is the best thing, this is the best for my job, this is the best for my career. You'll have plenty of other options, and it's also not about like grinding leak code or something like that just to get an interview. Like I did a lot of that too, and I just didn't feel happy about myself. I was like, what is this accomplishing? I don't really know. I could be doing other things that could maybe be helping me. And if people think like they want to do stuff like that, and that's totally okay. For me, I was like, you know what? We could do better things on your own too, but that's just my opinion.
I'm just keeping an eye on the time for this panel here. So I noticed that Will and Patrick, you have your hands up, but I'm not going to take your hands right now. Alex mentioned a really important point, which is that yes, there are opportunities in San Francisco and in the States and in Canada, but there are also a lot of opportunities abroad. There might not be as many right now during COVID-19, but with us are Isaac, Giovanna, Josh, and I'm sure others here have experience with things like applying for visas and dealing with foreign work cultures. I was just wondering if we could briefly talk about things that students should consider when they want to work abroad.
I'll say quickly, there are lots of not-for-profits and stuff out there that are super happy to help, both with, they have job postings online specifically for students to work abroad, and to help you with the whole visa application, finding a place to live and all that sort of thing. When I worked in Switzerland, I worked with a not-for-profit called IAESTE, which is a group that helps engineers, science students, business students, that sort of thing, get internships in over 80 countries. And it cost, I think it was $250 or something, and they helped me get my visa. They got me somewhere to live, and they run events while I was in the country so that I could meet people. So you don't have to do it all on your own. I've heard of at least a half dozen different organizations like that. And look around, they have job postings. If going abroad is something you want to do, there's lots of opportunities, and I'd highly recommend it.
I'd say a big one is the Facebook groups. There's Facebook groups for literally everything. Like Canadians in different countries, there's always a group. There's Canadians in New Zealand, so a lot of people ask about their visa questions there, and people give their experiences or like good health insurances. You can just ask whatever kind of questions you want. Even meeting new people when you're abroad. I joined some Facebook groups for like backpackers, and you meet some very cool people that way. And then even finding a place to live and for rent, Facebook groups is my biggest.
Also for me, working in Switzerland, I was living in Bern where they speak Swiss German. I don't speak any German. My French is awful, and it's not at a conversational level. And so it was at times kind of isolating, not speaking the language. But it was also great because I had the group of other students who were from all around, and their common language was English. And also at work, we spoke English. So it was really hard to adjust, like going to the grocery store and learning the German to, buy my food and that sort of thing. But don't feel too bad about going to a country where English is not the most spoken language, because you can get around the language barrier. I still don't know any German, and I managed to do 8 months in Switzerland without it. So the language barrier isn't as bad as a lot of the time people can perceive it.
All right. Thank you for sharing your experiences abroad. I'm going to move into the final topic of this panel, and then we're going to move into a break where the panelists can feel free to chat about whatever, and then we're going to take questions from social media and from the chat. So in the last section of this panel, I wanted to do a little bit of a spotlight on Will, because there was an overwhelming number of questions from social media and from students in general, wondering what is it like to work for the really big companies. So that's Facebook, Amazon, Apple, Netflix, Google, Microsoft, the quote unquote FAANG. So it's the dream of a lot of people to work for these companies. And we are lucky enough to have Will joining us today, who is from Amazon, currently employed there as an engineer at AWS. So Will, I'm really curious to know, what has your experience at Amazon been like? How did you get there? What are you working on? What's the work culture like?
Yeah, good question. So I think we got to backtrack a little bit because maybe not everyone knows what FAANG is, or so basically the word FAANG, or the acronym FAANG, came from this one investor guy back in like the 2000s or like mid 2000s, and he's like, oh, these are the stocks to watch. So he came up with the acronym FAANG for Facebook, Amazon, Apple, Netflix, and Google. And that kind of spread out into the tech scene as, you know, ideal places to work at because of compensation and, you know, the individuals you'll be working with and also the projects you'd be assigned on. For university students and graduates and also people who live in Canada, a lot of that is nullified because there's only like 2 FAANG companies in Canada. And also Netflix does not hire new grads. They only hire people with 10 to 15 years of experience. So I don't know why people use that in the tech scene for new grads. But basically, prior to applying to FAANG or Amazon, I was just a regular guy. I still am a regular guy, so don't get that wrong. And I actually started off in production support as my first co-op. Then I switched over to software. And then from then on, I kept going the software route just because I like software a lot more. So that doesn't mean that if you start off at a different role that is not development, doesn't mean you will be pigeonholed. You can still get out of it and go into dev work if that's what you're looking for. And in my last co-op term, I was working as a full stack developer for Wave. And I kind of felt like I wanted to switch scenes. So I applied to a lot of jobs, and that goes back to my 300 applications for my new grad role. And I applied for Amazon as a software development engineer. And we had a lot of interviews back and forth because they have a slightly more rigorous interview scene. And I'm sure Josh knows, Josh and Alex probably both know since they've worked at companies at similar level, and those levels, which are similar to FAANG and probably, I would say, highly more regarded than FAANG, are unicorn companies, which are startups that are valued at over $1 billion. So Shopify and Square are unicorn companies where they also offer very high compensation and rigorous interviews and such. So I went through a process of 3 online tests and then 3 back-to-back interviews, and I was put on a wait list because there were too many people who got offers, basically. And then after a couple months of waiting, I was hired and taken off the wait list, and I joined a team under AWS, Amazon Web Services, as a developer for Elasticache, which is basically our distributed caching system that integrates Redis and Memcache for larger companies. And I work as kind of like a back-end engineer there. In terms of work culture, it's not the best. It's just how it is in these bigger companies where you have to do a lot, or else, you know, you're kind of seen as a weaker person, which kind of goes back to the imposter syndrome. So it's not the best in terms of work culture. I've worked at smaller startups and smaller medium-sized companies that have a lot more work-life balance and better cultures. But it really does depend on which company you join. Other FAANG companies, such as Google and Microsoft, have a lot more lax culture and work-life benefit with also really good pay as well. So it really depends on what you're joining. Every company has their own unique bird.
I jump in quickly to say that at like Square specifically, I didn't really feel that at all. I kind of felt less of an expectation to succeed at Square because they were a large company that hired like 30 interns. And so if one didn't really do anything, yeah, I still tried my best, but like the company wasn't going to be severely impacted. Whereas at Taplytics, I was actually the only intern. And so there was a little bit more pressure at the beginning to be like, oh shoot, like they are like putting a lot of like trust and stuff like that in me. And so I feel like I do have to do well. Otherwise, like I'll disappoint, and there could be like bigger issues and stuff like that for the company themselves.
And William, so you mentioned you had to go on a wait list for this position as a new grad. Would you still encourage University of Guelph students to apply to these really big companies for their internships?
Yes, do it. Do it now, do it fast, and do it as fast as possible because it is a very good learning environment. Companies that are established have a very rigorous process in terms of onboarding and also in terms of what they're kind of trying to teach you, because as someone that works as an intern or co-op student, what the company is trying to do is poach you right before you graduate, because it costs significantly more for a company to hire a new graduate who has not been part of the company than to just offer a return offer, because as you can imagine, senior developers and managers cost a lot. And if you're making them interview people instead of doing their job, they're wasting their time and wasting the company's money. So if you do go into an internship at these bigger companies or companies in general, the chance of you getting a return offer is much higher than going to the normal interviewing scene. So I'd say yes, if you want to do it, then do it now. Do it as fast as possible.
Thanks for that advice. We're going to take a break now because it's 7 o'clock. So for everybody who's sitting, you've been sitting for a while now. You've probably spent most of your time in front of a computer because that's just how it is nowadays. So I'm just going to invite everybody to stand up if you're sitting down, stretch out your arms, wiggle around a bit, and then we're going to come back in 10 minutes. I'm going to pause the recording, and then feel free to banter in the chat. Ben is taking questions, and then we're going to address things from social media and then the questions from the chat real soon. Thanks. We should be recording again. So welcome to the Q&A section of this panel. So these are going to be some questions which were submitted to our panelists from social media and then also in the chat from this call. So I'm going to get things started off with a question that's directed to Giovanna. So the question is, how were you able to find a co-op abroad? Did you use Experience Guelph? Did you use something else? Actually, Giovanna's not here yet.
No, I'm here.
Okay.
I actually got pretty lucky because my sister lives in New Zealand, so I got it from her. Obviously, it's pretty useful knowing someone and having connections and networking. So yeah, I got my role because of my sister. She worked at the same company and just forwarded it in. Not really helpful for other people, but if you know someone who lives somewhere else, take advantage of them.
That's an excellent point. I think leveraging your network is a really important, really good skill. And yeah, I guess the same question goes to Isaac then, because I think you touched on this during the panel, but how did you find this co-op abroad? You're muted right now.
So I also found it. One of my friends did basically the exact same co-op job. And I just said, I want to work in Switzerland. Here's my resume. Give it to your supervisor. But he got it by looking at online job boards. So he just applied to a job at a random company in Switzerland that he had never heard of, and did the interview process and that sort of thing and got the job. And so that way does work. But definitely it's much easier when you have somebody out there and you can just say, give my resume to, somebody important, and it's a much faster process that way.
I also want to emphasize that even if you're not going abroad, you can still leverage your connections. Like, for example, I actually used my brother as a reference to get into Square in San Francisco. And then I used my time working there to get my next job at Cash App. And then Alex, the other panelist, actually referred me to Tablytics. So that's kind of how I got my last 3 co-ops.
So I'm hearing a lot of networked job acquisitions.
One of my friends who did a research position in France just emailed every single professor in France and said, hey, I'm looking for a research position, and he got one. So maybe just spam or shotgun some resumes at some professors in France.
That could be a good strategy too. Cool. Okay, I'm going to say our next question, which is directed at Alex. You were asked, how is it that I can make my resume stand out? I'm not sure why this was directed at you specifically, but if you have any advice, go for it.
I do actually, because one of the things that I like to do is before I leave a company is go to Min Tech Recruiter or someone in HR that's responsible for looking at resumes, and I show them mine. I'm like, what is wrong with this? Tell me what I can do better. And throughout the internships, multiple that I've heard lots of stuff getting back. And definitely the number one thing is that I've heard is keep it to one page. You might have a lot of stuff that you want, but keep it to one page, because these people are looking at resumes for max maybe 20 seconds and they're just skimming. And if they see more than one page, half the time they're not even gonna like look at it, which is crazy, but they see thousands of resumes a day sometimes. So definitely keep it to one page. And I would also actually recommend, like, a lot of people use like Word or something to make your resume. I've actually used a markdown language called LaTeX to create mine, and you can get a lot more fine sort of editing. So instead of like making a margin 0.5 and you move it over and it blows up your entire document like in Word, this is like basically programming to create it. So I highly recommend that. And yes, in the chat, that's how you spell it. So thanks, Ben, for that.
Yeah, it's LATEX. It's pronounced LaTeX.
Can I say one
Okay,
thing on this point? One very small thing
yeah,
for
go for it,
resumes
Patrick.
too is I noticed a lot more results after I started bolding keywords, which was something that was suggested to me by a friend who just finished his internship at Honey in San Francisco. So just simple things like that, like like if you're working in C#, highlighting C# where it says that on your resume in the line or something like that. And then especially if it's like appropriate for the position, if they're looking for C# or something, then they're just going to read through, and when they're skimming, they're going to look at the bold and they're going to see C#, and that'll like trigger something in them. So I think that can also be helpful, just emphasizing the specific technologies that you're using.
I feel like this is a fairly broad topic. Is there any tips from other panelists about how to make your resume stand out?
One other quick tip that I got, which I found very valuable, was adding the language in the description for everything you do. And so Patrick's tip, like, that was implied, but before I heard it from my brother, actually, I didn't put the language in every single thing, only in a couple. And he said, everything you do, put the language in, because no matter what point they skim, you want to make sure they see what languages you're using, and even other technologies as well.
That's a good tip. Our next question is a bit about some job descriptions. So Patrick, we had some people from Instagram wondering, what does one do as a control systems software developer? Can you describe your experience?
Yeah,
at
sure.
Mantech?
So I worked at Mantech this summer, and Will actually used to work there as well. So I can see in all the commit history, Will Toy. So that was funny. But yeah, so we were working on, Mantech is out of Guelph. I'm sure you guys have seen it on Experience Guelph. But they create water sensors. And we were developing the desktop app for the analysis and basically just the hardware to software bridge for the water sensors. So we're dealing a lot with, for control systems specifically, I'd say, I actually dealt a little bit with the embedded C firmware on some of the chips, because they actually they make their own chips. And they were having some issues with one of the COD, which is chemical oxygen demand sensors. So I was actually dealing with the firmware for that chip. And yeah, so I think it's honestly just like the definition of that was just like you're doing a lot of like hardware software bridge, but also at the same time, I don't know if the person who made that job title has any idea like what that technically means. But yeah, I'd say that the system was just talking about like hardware to software systems.
And Will has his hand raised.
Yeah, so when I did work at Mantech, it wasn't called control systems software developing or control systems software developer, but I have worked in the same role that Patrick has, and I have worked as a control system software designer for a different company. And Patrick is pretty accurate. What you're working on there is, working on applications that can communicate with robots or these kind of like third-party machines that can take in a specific reading and then translate that to either analog or digital, and then you do something from that signal that you get. So at Mantech specifically, what they were working on, just to reiterate what Patrick was talking about, is they have a set of these hardware devices that can take in a series of signals, either turbidity or pH or whatever. And what they wanted to do was they set it all up together so that they can all look at all the sample size or the sample at the same time, and they can go through like a bunch of titrations, and then from that they can tell what Patrick was talking about, chemical oxygen demand, and also BOD and all that stuff, just so it's within standards for selling water products in Canada, basically. So when I was there, I was working on a lot of the translation between hardware and software, and also setting up the routines for the workflows when they went through the titrations, and also all of the analysis that went through of what each signal meant and how can it be displayed in a human readable way.
Cool. That's great to get some clarification on that. I think that from that, we know that software has pretty far-reaching impacts across a lot of different industries. You spoke a lot of chemistry terms there. I have a question from Instagram for Christina, which is a question about your minor. So you chose a media and cinema studies minor. What made you decide that you wanted to do that, and how have you enjoyed it so far?
It's been very fun. It's so it is media and cinema, and I don't really know how I feel about the media part because I only took one course so far. Prof was interesting to say the least, so I can't really give feedback on that part, but the film classes have been very, very fun. They make you watch the most, actually there was one course that makes you watch like blockbuster movies, and others make you watch like random European cinema movies, and it's very interesting. And the reason I chose it is because I'm simply into movies. I love dissecting them, like learning about themes, hidden like messages, whatever. And also, I did want to go into game design ultimately, and I wanted to be like more of a director, storyteller, wherever. So that kind of comes in hand where it has the whole like cinematography, directing, the hidden themes, as I said. So I was like, not only do I like film, but I think the skills that I can learn from how movies are made can also translate into what I want to do as a tech job.
That's a great perspective to hear. Thank you. I think that that's it for the questions from social media, because most of them or all of them have already been, no, sorry, I have one more. Can I get an internship even if I'm just a first year? So some first years are wondering, how can they get an internship? How can they get an internship? Our co-op program starts at the second year. So most students are going to be getting their work terms in the second year after completing a full academic term. Can first years still get internships? Should they try?
There's no harm in trying. I mean, it's possible, it's been done. The whole point of internships is to learn and to expand your experience. And a lot of the time when they hire interns, they don't expect to have any experience. So go ahead and try.
I think the general gist though was, yeah, if you're a first year, you want an internship, then you should definitely try. We're gonna move over to Ben now, who's gonna take the questions from the chat, just because we have not very much time left. So Ben, you have the floor.
All right, hi everyone, I'm Ben. Great to have everyone here. I'm very happy with how this is going. Good job to all of our panelists and to Keefer. I'll actually start off with a few questions that are in a similar vein to the one that Isaac just attempted to answer. So Taha M said, do you have any advice for getting noticed by startups outside of co-op? And do you cold email recruiters, apply on their website, use AngelList? How do you get people to take you seriously if you're a freshman and don't have much experience?
I can maybe speak to this a little bit, sort of on the startup, if you're looking specifically at startups. Definitely sort of do the cold calling thing, like get ready for some rejection, because some recruiters like probably get lots of these messages, but again, try and stand out in a way, find them on LinkedIn and like maybe if they have multiple recruiters, find one for the team you're interested in, learn about the company, do a little bit of research, and absolutely either message them on LinkedIn, or even better, like do some real digging and find an email of someone at the company, like a manager for a team you want, and email that directly. I've done that before, and they're most of the time they're like, how the heck did you find my email or something? And you're like, don't worry about it. Like, it's cool, but that'll get you in, right? So definitely do the cold calling thing, especially if you don't really have much else to show for it. Like, it can't hurt. So that's what I definitely recommend.
I actually answered this in the chat, but I got my last co-op by just emailing the recruiter, and they she actually seemed to like it a lot, just because it kind of shows interest, and that's your spot where, even though most companies don't require cover letters, when you're applying to startups, they want you to care about the company, not just like making money and working a job. But I kind of expanded there, learned a little bit about the company, and they seemed to like it a lot, and I ended up getting the internship, which was awesome.
All right, awesome. So since we're on this, Devala also asked, what are your thoughts on reaching out via email or on LinkedIn to recruiters or any job postings?
You should just do it. I mean, the worst you can get is ignored. And if you get ignored, you just move on to the next person and message them too. And then the best you can do is get a job. So why not?
Right. So
I would
posting
also-
doesn't matter so much as doing it.
Yeah, I would also
Yeah.
say do it, but make sure to like learn about the
professional.
company. Don't just send the same email to 100 people, because you might get 2 responses. Whereas if you put the 10 minutes in to learn about the company, you might get 30. And it's
Yeah,
all about
and-
numbers, right?
You want to be professional, because if you are on LinkedIn, they know who you are. And if you are not professional, you will get blacklisted and it will hurt your future. So be very professional.
All right, awesome. Okay, we have a little one here. Zach Silverman's wondering, do you have a better success rate in external applications or applications through Guelph's portal?
Internal. Way better. Like
Okay.
exponentially better. I had, apart from Deloitte, I did not hear a lot of responses back for external during my first 2 co-op terms. For the most recent one, I was getting more. But yeah, I'd say like internal has like a way higher success rate for hearing back at the very least, or getting interviews. So I have a way higher percentage.
Yeah, just to add on to what Patrick is saying, the reason why you get more response through internal rather than external is because it is a Guelph funnel. So we are funneled into companies that are specifically looking at Guelph students because they are going through Experience Guelph and they've put their thing through Experience Guelph. The reason why external applications are much harder to get noticed is because those same companies also have their own internal funnels. So companies like the big ones have internal funnels in the US. They also have the University of Waterloo, University of Toronto. So the reason why you're not being noticed as much in the external pool is because they already have a wide funneled pool of applicants from targeted universities. Does that mean you should not apply externally? No. Often you can find more jobs externally that are fitting your passions because the internal application pool in Guelph is small compared to other universities and LinkedIn in general.
All right, that's awesome. Great advice. So now I have a couple of questions about our out-of-country employees. First, Sonia would like to know what the name of that non-for-profit was that helped her finding jobs abroad. I believe Joshua was talking about this.
Yeah, it's IAESTE. Let me put it in the chat. I don't know what it stands for. I can't remember, but that's it. It's in the chat.
Okay, great. We have another question that was asking if you could talk a little bit more about the process of transitioning into an internship outside of the country, so just getting the work visa or other ways it differs from working here in Canada.
I'll say that you have to start early. Like it's a several month-long process, like because it takes a couple months to get a visa and that sort of thing, and you have to do that after you've already interviewed. So you need to start like applying at least 6 months, I think, before the start, so you have time to go through the the screening, the interviewing, the salary stuff, and then you can do all the visa, that sort of thing, book your flights, find accommodation in a foreign country. Like it just takes a lot longer than if you were, say, applying to a company in Waterloo.
Right.
At Square, it was not too bad because they've done a lot of hiring specifically from Waterloo to the US to both New York and San Francisco. And so they kind of had the process already all like ironed out. And honestly, it was super easy and seamless. They dealt with most of it, and there was a company that they worked with, and they took most of the hassle out. For me, it was just finding housing and stuff like that. But they also put you in a group with other co-op students to try to figure it out, which was awesome.
Great. And I think I heard someone else trying to weigh in.
Yeah, personally, mine was super easy. The New Zealand one, you just apply online. It took me like 15 minutes to fill out, and I got it within 2 days. In my experience, I feel like you should get the visa first because a lot of jobs don't want to interview you if there's a chance of you not being able to legally work for them. So as long as you're like, hey, I can come to the country on this date and I can work for you for 2 years, I feel like some companies might like that.
Yeah,
that's how
for me, the visa was, to get the visa, I needed a job. So I had to do all the interviewing first. And then once I had the job, the company could sponsor the visa. But yeah, I think I would agree. A lot of companies that hire from Canada into the US already have it all streamlined. And it's the smaller companies that hire fewer people in, say, European countries that it's more difficult. There's more hoops to jump through, but still worth it.
Yeah, something else for like getting those is like you said, Isaac, like lots of countries won't give you a visa if you don't have a job, and like New Zealand is one of the few, like in CANZAC, like which is the group of, it's just a group of countries like UK, Canada, New Zealand that I think Australia's in it. Yeah, Australia's in it as well, where you can get visas very easily. So the US wouldn't be included in that, and lots of Europe, it would be very difficult to get visas without a job already.
All right, thank you very much. So we are over time already, and I don't want to waste your time. So Keefer says I can do one more, and then I'll let him close out officially. From Matthew N. says, I hear a lot of people in the first work term struggle finding jobs that they desire. Many people are saying more support or quality assurance type jobs are attained, which they might not want. What is your advice on how to maximize the quality of your co-op? And if you could look back on your co-ops, what would you have done differently?
As someone who both their co-ops had nothing to do with what they actually wanted to do, I feel like I can speak a little bit on this. Honestly, don't have that mindset. I know that kind of sounds like a weird tip, but the reason why it took me so long to get my first co-op work term, and it's because I was picky, because I wanted only the perfect job, and that was not the right mindset. It's only stressed me out in the end because I got like my job offer last second, and with the whole COVID thing, that was not what I wanted to be doing. And ultimately, the job with Judy was UI design evaluation, and then the job now with Stacy has like some marketing, some outreach. And instead of looking at like, oh, this has nothing to do what I want, this is stupid, I chose to see how I could use it towards what I wanted. For example, the UI design. I learned that you can just be a UI designer for game design. Like, it's simple as that. You can literally just translate those skills over. Marketing, like, you don't have to be the coder in whatever you want to do. You don't have to be the guy that just sits behind the keyboard tapping away 24/7. You can be the marketing guy. You can be the outreach guy. You can handle the social media. And even if that might not be your end goal, at least it's a starting spot. And you can, like, say you really want to work with whatever company, and you didn't have any co-op terms that had to do with like coding, you could still be like, hey, I did a lot of social media. You have a social media spot. Can I get it? And then maybe work your way through the ranks. Like, I think the worst thing you can do is limit yourself to just this one thing that I want to do, and make sure that you get in that one company. That's not how you take advantage of co-op. It really is supposed to be about broadening your horizons.
Right. Anyone else like to weigh in on that?
Yeah, I think a lot of people are scared of being pigeonholed. So I think what Matthew was trying to get to was, what if I go into QA and I want to be a developer, but I can't become a developer because all my subsequent jobs are now in QA? What do I do? So fear not, you will not be pigeonholed because you are a co-op student. So you're expected to be in roles where you might not be specifically talented in, and you're expected to be able to learn and take those things that you learn into your next role. So what I always recommend is to take ownership of something. So when you do go into your next co-op interview, you don't have to say something like, oh, I don't really know what I was doing because I didn't really like it. So if I didn't like it, then I wasn't paying attention. So if you take ownership of a product or responsibility, then you're able to talk more in depth about what you were doing, and that will inspire other employers to look for you as whatever job you were looking for, because you were showing other aspects of job, of a desirable employee rather than just technical experience, and that's very important as well.
Awesome answer. Thank you very much. So I think I'll hand this back over to Keefer just to close us out and let you know what's going on with the people who want to stick around for a bit. So thank you guys so much again. You're doing an awesome job.
Thanks, Ben, for taking questions from the chat. And thank you to all of our panelists for joining us tonight. I think that this has been a valuable experience for everybody who is in attendance and is going to be watching the recording after. I'm going to end this meeting now. So again, thank you so much for joining.